Good evening. Since last fall, nearly 20 journalists and opposition activists have been arrested in Azerbaijan. The U.S. Congress reportedly moves to impose sanctions against top Azerbaijani officials for human rights violations. How is this linked to the peace process between Baku and Yerevan? This will be the focus of the interview with U.S. Congressman Frank Pallone tonight. Mr. Pallone, thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you.
As you know, Baku boycotts Western platforms of negotiations. You must have guessed by now that this is obviously connected to the West's soft approach. Does this sanction suggest that the West, the US namely, finally realized that being soft on an authoritarian regime basically means losing influence over it?
Well, I want to stress to you that I really think the most important thing in terms of U.S.-Armenia relations right now is for the United States to bolster Armenia's security. In other words, there's a lot of talk about an agreement over territorial, delineation of Armenia versus Azerbaijan. But to me, as important as that is, it's not as important as the U.S., bolstering not only Armenia's security, but also its economy and providing humanitarian assistance to the refugees from Artsakh, because I never really trust that Azerbaijan will ever come to a peaceful agreement of anything, right? I mean, obviously they promised they were going to have a peaceful agreement with regard to Artsakh, and then they invaded. And my fear is that, they'll just talk and talk about peace, but then at some point they'll invade Armenia as well. So that's why I don't put a lot of stock in these peace agreements as much as I would like to see one.
Is this a general perception in the US, Mr. Pallone, that peace is not what Baku wants, but this is lip service they're paying to it, and sometimes not even lip service, because militaristic rhetoric is very typical of Baku officials?
Well, I think the United States and our State Department and our leadership here in Washington is trying to push Baku as well as Yerevan to a peace settlement, and I certainly support that. But yes, a lot of us have serious reservations after the Artsakh war that Baku is serious about a peace agreement.
How willing, would you say, is the U.S., how committed is the U.S. to bring peace to pass in South Caucasus?
Well, we think it's important because the region is important, right? In other words, if the Caucasus, particularly the South Caucasus, were to flare up into another military conflict, it could spill over. It could, obviously you have Turkey, you have Georgia. There's a lot of potential. I mean, it's an area that has a lot of potential historically to flare up into, a military hotspot, and that is not a good thing right now. I mean, we have enough wars going on between Ukraine and Gaza and everything else that we don't need the South Caucasus region to flare up and bring in some of the larger countries like Russia and Turkey. But I think we had to be cautious because we saw Aliyev, say, "Oh, I want to have peace. I want to have peace," and then he simply invaded Artsakh and decimated the Armenian population. Caused them to be refugees from their own land. And so he's not a very trustworthy partner at this point.
As you mentioned yourself, 10 months of blockade of ethnic Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh, followed by forced deportation, and Baku has not yet seen any economic or political consequences for this. How would you comment?
Well, that's true. And that's why I would like to see sanctions against the leadership in Azerbaijan, but that hasn't happened yet. I mean, it's something that we advocate. The other thing we advocate is that Section 907 of the Freedom Support Act that allows for waivers so that the U.S. could continue to provide security assistance to Azerbaijan, that be repealed. because the last thing I want is for the United States to continue to provide any kind of security assistance to Azerbaijan. So our efforts right now are to say, look, Azerbaijan has been a bad actor. We should sanction their leadership. We should prohibit any kind of military assistance to Azerbaijan. And we should be bolstering the Armenian economy and providing them with security assistance because they need it in the event of an attack from Azerbaijan.
Back to the possible sanctions or the possibility of sanctions, how likely are they to pass?
Well, I think that it's hard. You know, we have passed sanctions in the past in other situations against other countries that haven't been that successful. And so I think right now in the Congress, there are a lot of people who think that sanctions don't work and that they're more, you know, message-oriented than they are practically oriented. But a message is important too. I don't want to take away from that. I mean, I think that part of the problem with Azerbaijan is that they do believe that the United States is not going to take any action against them. And so an action that would sanction the leaders would send a good message. You know, repealing the waivers for Section 907, so no security assistance can go from the U.S. to Azerbaijan. That's another, that sends a message too. You know, all of this is an effort to make sure that Aliyev and the Azerbaijani leadership don't think that they can launch another military attack against, in this case, against Armenia or the southern part of Armenia. So I don't want to take away from the fact that that some of these proposed actions like sanctions or repealing Section 907 don't have an impact. We need to send the leadership in Azerbaijan a message that, you know, this continued use of force is going to have consequences for them.
Back to my first question, do you believe that a tougher approach on Baku would be actually more effective than the soft approach that we have seen so far from the West?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The soft approach with them does not work. And that clearly was shown in the case of Artsakh. Within a day or two before the attack took place on Artsakh and Stepanakert, Aliyev was saying that he was going to open up the Lachin corridor, telling the State Department he was going to open up a corridor to Baku, you know, that he wanted peace, and then he just attacked. So, yeah, I mean, the soft approach doesn't work.
Why are there no consequences for breaking all the commitments that Aliyev had with the West concerning NK population? By the way, the U.S. State Dep said we will not tolerate ethnic cleansing in Nagorno-Karabakh, but obviously they did.
Well, I wouldn't say tolerate it. Obviously, they were trying to prevent it, but it didn't work, right? Their, as you say, soft approach didn't work. I mean, look, the bottom line is we continue to have the case that Turkey is a NATO ally. Azerbaijan has a lot of oil and natural resources. And, you know, the U.S. continues to see Turkey and Azerbaijan as important strategically. I don't think they're as important strategically as many people in Washington think. And I think we shouldn't just pay attention to their strategic importance. We have to think about human rights violations, the rule of law, and democracy. Armenia is an example of one of the Soviet republics that has made serious moves towards improving its democracy and the rule of law and its market economy. And they should be rewarded for that, and we shouldn't pay as much attention to the fact that the dictatorship in Azerbaijan has oil, or that Turkey is a member of NATO. If they're bad actors, then we should respond to their bad actions.
The Armenian government places so much importance on democracy that they consider it to be a component of security. Do you agree with this approach first? And secondly, how do you evaluate democratic reform in Armenia?
I agree with their approach because I do think that if you want to have a strong country, however we define that, whether it's from a military point of view, an economic point of view, or you need, in my opinion, to have a democracy. Now, you could, say, well, some totalitarian governments are very strong economically, maybe use China as an example. But the fact of the matter is that totalitarian regimes at any point could collapse because they don't have the support of their people. And that's why I think that democracy and national security and a strong economy go together. There are those who would disagree, but I do think that when you have the support of the people through a democratic society, you're more likely to be a strong nation over the long run.
Mr. Pallone, with its deteriorating relations with CSTO, Armenia is in need of a new strategic partnership. Alliances with France and India seem to be on their way. Is the U.S. interested in forming one?
Well, absolutely. I mean, we've talked a lot about new. First of all, I think the most obvious thing would be for having Armenia ultimately join NATO, join the European Union. That's the most logical thing, it seems to me, from both a security and economic point of view, because they're part of Europe, right? But we certainly would like to have more, security relations and economic relations, which could take the form of some sort of treaty or agreement, memorandum of understanding, various things that could be done.
As Pashinyan steers towards the West, Russia accuses the West of using Armenia against it. How would you comment?
Well, Putin thinks that any of the former Soviet republics or any of the former Warsaw Pact nations that move towards the West, either by joining NATO or the EU, pose a danger to Russia. I don't buy that. I mean, obviously, I'd like to see Russia become a democracy and overthrow the dictatorship and ultimately be part of these European arrangements as well. But that can't be done with a totalitarian regime, or while Putin continues to build up his military and make Russia into this militaristic state that wants to attack everyone, including Ukraine. You'd have to have a regime change for Russia to be seen as a partner in anything.
After his latest visit to Moscow, Aliyev set forth 3 preconditions again for the peace treaty. Armenia has to change its constitution, remove Mount Ararat as its national symbol, and provide communication between Azerbaijan and Nakhichevan. Does the U.S. perceive this as sabotaging the peace process to prolong Russian influence in the region? And if so, how will the U.S. weigh in to bring peace to pass?
Well, Russia's role has been, in any kind of peace agreement, has been totally disappointing to me, and I think to the Republic of Armenia. In other words, I had expected that Putin and Russia would defend Artsakh and against an attack, or defend Armenia against an attack. And certainly that was part of the security arrangement that they had with Russia and some of the other countries that are part of their security agreement. That didn't happen. And I think that's one of the reasons why Prime Minister Pashinyan decided that it didn't make sense to continue as part of that Russian security agreement and move towards the West, because he saw the failure of it. Russia's been disgraceful in the way they've treated Armenia. I think that, they were expected to play some role, and they didn't. And so at this point, I don't even know what the point is of Moscow being involved, because they can't be seen as someone who's a friend of Armenia anymore.
Mr. Pallone, thank you one more time for this opportunity.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. You take care.
U.S. Congressman Frank Pallone joined the first analytical tonight.